Hi all. In this video, Nat Bennett and I talk about their experience as a tech lead on Cloud Foundry. Years ago, they told me that they believed that their role as the tech lead was to claw back time for the product manager. And that perspective just blew my mind. So in this conversation, we dig into the experience that they had that led them to that conclusion, as well as several other insights that I found equally surprising, and I mean that in the best possible way. If you've ever felt like your team was underwater, pulled in too many directions, mired in tech debt, or just plain tired, this conversation is for you. Let's dig in. Hi, I'm Elisabeth Hendrickson, and today I am here with my good friend, Nat Bennett. I am so excited for this conversation. Nat, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Nat Bennett. I am a software engineer. I did like 5 years at Cloud Foundry, Pivotal, XP, all that stuff. These days, mostly a consultant and working on a Pivotal Tracker inspired project management tool called Storytime. But yeah, I make software for software people. I talk to people about how to make software. Yeah, and I met actually Elisabeth is why I'm in the software engineering industry in the first place. Well, I started my career at a weird, tiny little company doing software testing, kind of accidentally ended up there. And then when I was looking for, the next job after that, got online with Twitter being like, my cool exploratory testing job is turning into not that. And Elisabeth was like, come work for me.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
And that didn't end up happening then, but it did happen a couple of years later. So yeah, exploratory testing background is the other thing. Started off, I have an English degree. I have, on some level, no business whatsoever being in this career, but I started programming computers, and it turned out I was pretty good at it, and so I kept doing it.
Actually,
No,
I think your background gives you a very interesting perspective on everything that we do.
yeah, I've actually, like, the longer that I'm in the industry, the less the more of an advantage it is, having a different odd background. But like, I didn't learn to program really until I was like 23, which not totally unique, but yeah, kind of an odd path into it.
Well, and I think that different perspective, though, is what allowed you. I got to see on Cloud Foundry. Let me back up. You and I worked together on Cloud Foundry. And I got to see on Cloud Foundry how you would come at things with a different perspective than somebody who maybe was coming from a purely software engineering background. And there's actually a story that I wanted to start with today where you kind of blew my mind. So there we were in a coffee shop, and at that point, I think I had rolled off Cloud Foundry and was off in a different part of Pivotal. And you were telling me about your latest rotation, which was to be on the Cloud Ops team. So technically speaking, not a pure software engineering team. And you were the anchor, essentially the tech lead for that team. And what you said to me was, I realized my job as anchor is to claw back as much time for the product manager as I can. And you blew my mind. That phrase has stuck with me for that would have been over 10 years ago now, I think, that you said that to me, and yet I still think of that on a regular basis. So I was hoping that we could start with you telling the story of being the anchor on CloudOps and what exactly you meant by clawing back time for the product manager.
Yeah. Because that was my first. It was kind of my first big break. Cloud Ops. It's like I got to Cloud Foundry and I'd been a tester before and I'd done a little bit of programming. It wasn't a totally new thing, but like I was very much like Cloud Foundry was where I learned to be a software engineer. And I did that for a few years, and then Cloud Ops needed an anchor, and they were like, Nat, you need an anchor ship. You need your first anchor ship. And I was like, okay, I don't really know what I'm doing, but sure, I'll do this. What CloudOps did, just for a little bit of a background, like Cloud Foundry is this product that runs applications. It's a little bit like Kubernetes. It's a little bit like Heroku. And it primarily was customers would buy it and they would run it on their own systems, on their own servers, on their own vSpheres. which was great for a lot of reasons, but very frustrating if you were a software developer who was dealing with a bug report. And we're trying to understand what the heck had happened. We had this system called Pivotal Web Services, where we ran our own in-house version of Cloud Foundry, and members of the public could sign up for it just like you can with Heroku, and push apps to it and run those apps. And so I was on the team CloudOps that ran the Cloud Foundry that backed this service. And so it was the in-house version of this software that had many, many, many different installations. But like this was a special installation because it was the one that we had access to in R&D. And so when I rolled on, CloudOps was having a couple of different problems, but one of them was that we were kind of underwater in keeping up with releases. So we were kind of underwater in keeping up with deploys from the rest of R&D that was trying to get their stuff into the PDUB. We call it PDUBs, Pivotal Web Service, PDUBs. Trying to get their software onto the observable, what was in some ways a test system, even though it was also production. And they were trying to get that into our system before they cut the release to put it into the customer-facing, like, packaged version. And we had this big queue of deploys that we were trying to do. That configuration system on PDUBs at the time was basically unique amongst all Cloud Foundries. There were 3 different ways that you could configure a Cloud Foundry, basically 3 different, like, dialects of YAML that you could be writing. And there was one for all the open source systems, and there was one for the closed source system that Pivotal sold, and then there was one for PDUBs.
I remember. Yeah.
It was the older one, right? The open source one that everybody else was using for their test systems had replaced it. And so we were dealing with this older, harder to work with. And what was really, the big thing really was that just it was different from what everybody else was using. And so every time somebody gave us a patch, basically, we had to look at it, figure out how to apply it to our system. And so the PM had this queue of changes that other teams were trying to get in, and that we were trying to work through, and then that queue was getting longer and longer. And so one of the things that I was thinking about a lot on this team was like, well, how do we go faster, right? How do we do more of the stuff that we're trying to do? And I started paying attention to, like, the PM was like visibly frustrated at times. She would notice that, like, okay, there was this thing that I really cared about in the backlog, and this was Pivotal. So we used Pivotal Tracker, and the important thing about that is that we worked off of a single priority ordered list. So there was no like, oh, the manager assigns this thing to this person and this other thing to this person and this other thing to this other person. Like, in theory, everybody is just, when they need a new task, they go to the queue and they pull something off the queue and they work the next item in the queue. And the PM would look and would be like, okay, so this thing that I really cared about, that was like my number 1 priority for this week, was at like position 5 at the start of the week, below all of this other stuff that I don't care about as a PM as much, but like needs to happen for the software to run. And at the end of the week, it's at like position 4. It didn't happen. So like, what is going on? The biggest one, I think, was basically just like Eisenhower matrix stuff, where engineers, like, stuff would pop up. It was an operations team, right? Things would pop. We would get bug reports and alerts would fire, and things would come to our attention that we needed to deal with, and we would start working on them, right? We would put down whatever thing we were, whatever, like, not immediately urgent thing we were working on. And then we would pick up the urgent thing and we start working on the urgent thing. And then like 2 days later, we would still be working on it, even though it was not as important as the thing that was in the queue. And then the other thing that, was very obvious, if you've read the SRE book, you're going to know where this is going, was that we were doing a lot of toil. We were doing a lot of, like, it has been like 10 years, so I don't remember the exact details of it, but we were just, the one that I remember really was, we were handling a lot of pages that didn't require any action. There was just all this stuff that was, that we needed to do as an operations team that was just kind of keeping the lights on kind of stuff. What I described at the beginning, actually doing those config changes by hand, right, was in this category of like, it's going to scale with the size of the organization that we're supporting, like linearly. So if it's page handling, right, the bigger the system gets, the more likely there is to be some random page fires, and you need to do engineering work to bend that scaling curve. And I remember commenting, right, in a meeting around this time with an engineering manager, and just making this offhand comment like, our goal is to let Cloud Foundry scale, let the R&D organization scale, without us having to grow, without us having to scale ON with the size of the R&D organization, without having our team have to scale ON with the size of our engineering organization. And the manager was like, oh, that's a really good point. Yeah, so we were doing all this toil, and I remember really clearly doing two things. So one of them was every day at stand up, I would ask the PM, what's your number one priority this week? Like, what's the one thing that you want us to get done? You only get one thing, but pick one thing. And be like, okay, who's on that today? We're always going to have a pair. Always working on the top thing, the top priority. We had like 4 pairs. It was a big team, but we didn't always have someone working on the top priorities. That was the number one thing, was just whatever the number one thing is, someone's working on it. And if they catch a page, right, or if they encounter something else that happens that needs to be investigated, we hand that off to someone else.
You hand the new thing off to someone.
You hand the new thing off to someone else. We hand the new thing off to someone else. Because no matter what else happens, we're going to make progress every day on one thing that the PM cares about. Ideally, in a lot of cases, like PMs would like to have more than just one person working on whatever their top priority is. But like this is like almost always you can kind of just scrape out a certain amount of capacity just by willing it into existence, just by deciding we're going to work on it.
I have a clarifying question, because you said one person, but you also talked about pairing.
Oh, yes.
So if you had 4 pairs, are you saying that every single day, 25% of the capacity of the team, like just assuming nobody's out for whatever reason, but you've got 4 pairs, so one pair is going to be focused on moving the ball forward on the top priority,
yes,
no matter what else happens. So
yep.
A minimum of 25% capacity is going to PM priorities.
Yes.
And then again, I want to just highlight that the context of this team is an operations team. And because some people might listen to this and say, holy snacks, only 25% capacity was going to a PM priority. But it was the nature of the work.
Yeah, absolutely. And this was a kind of ops team where we also spent a fair amount of time building our own tools. So it was that kind of ops team. But yes, this was, the ratios are different than they would be on a software team that didn't have operational responsibilities. Though, like, increasingly, the teams that I work on, and this is partially like the nature of the work that I do, is people don't call me when things are going real great, right?
No one ever calls a consultant and says, things are awesome, we want to pay you to come observe us be awesome. It just doesn't happen.
I love everything that the people in charge of this team before me did, right? No, that's not.
That's not how any of this works.
But I work with a lot of teams these days where they're very, very reactive. Even if they're software engineering teams, and even if they're very reactive, and they're very much working on often bug fixes or urgent issues from, often it's startups, right? Like the version of this that I think that folks will see at startups when they're not on an ops team is startups often do a lot of manual work behind the scenes, right? The little like duck feet paddling underneath. And it turns out that there's like some critical business, like onboarding, for instance, often involves software engineers going in and writing SQL to set up the database in such a way for the new customer that's being added, right? There's often a surprising amount of manual work behind the scenes, especially in B2B SaaS. And so that's the version of this that I've seen on non-ops teams, is teams that get kind of overwhelmed with the software-like operational responsibilities that require an engineer because of the way the system is structured, but aren't moving the ball forward in terms of new capabilities. Right? They're extending a capability to a new customer, but they're not adding a new capability for all customers.
You were talking about how one pair was always on the PM's top priority. And you
Yeah.
said that there were two things that you did. So one was to make sure that one pair was always focused and able to focus and put away other things, other distractions, always able to focus on the top priority. What was the
Right.
second thing that you did?
Yeah. So then there's the question of the other folks on the team are working on a mix of kind of urgent work that can't necessarily be ignored, but then also work that's designed chores, basically. What we call chores at Pivotal, which in a Pivotal tracker context, a chore is basically work that engineers are doing for their own reasons, upgrading dependencies, refactoring, deploy, updating the deploy system. And so feature work is work that the PM prioritizes, and chores is work that the engineering team prioritizes. I remember really distinctly going and looking at, well, what are the chores in the backlog? Like, are we working on the right things? And also just like, there's so much stuff here, right? That like, many years of very good engineers have written all these things that need to be fixed and need to be improved on the system. And like, how do we decide which ones to do next? And I remember going through this list and just pulling up all of the ones that I saw that I were like, oh, if we do that, we will be able to just stop doing this little bit of work that we have to do every week. If we do that, we will just immediately save ourselves some time that then we can put back into doing more improvement work, tackling the harder problems, or that we can put straight into PM priorities. And so that was sort of the context in which I was having that conversation with you of like, oh yeah, it's kind of my job, and especially on that particular team where there was this mix of there was so much urgent day-to-day operational work, and realizing that like a big part of my job, as this person who had this title, anchor, who was not the most experienced engineer on the team, I couldn't necessarily solve every technical problem the best way or like tell everybody how to do their jobs, right? But what I could do really effectively, even then, was be thinking about, where are we going to be 6 months from now? Where are we going to be 2 years from now? Where do we need to be? Is our vector correct? Right? Is the direction correct? And is the length of the vector what we want it to be? Right? Is the speed correct? In that case, trying to get it higher, sometimes you actually want to get that vector slower. If you're not sure what direction you should be going, uh,
You're right. Going full steam ahead in the wrong direction does not actually get you closer to the goal.
no.
Yes. Okay,
Yeah,
I get it
yeah,
now.
yeah. So it was really my job to be thinking about not what's the latest fire on the system today, but like, what do we need to be able to do so that we can do our job a little bit better next week, a little bit better next month. And like, I think it's on some level, it's like everybody's responsibility to be thinking about that kind of thing, especially as senior engineers. But I think there really is, when I am in a formal team lead role, I really think of a big part of that job is being the designated future thinker, because there's so much work that the team has to do, and it's hard to do day-to-day engineering work and be thinking about where the team needs to be 2 years from now at the same time. One person can do it, but it's like it takes energy to switch between those two modes. And so I think it's useful often for a team to have somebody who's like, you're the designated future capacity person. And so that's really one of the core things that I think of as like the tech lead job. That's like my version of how we got to me saying, I think my job is to be thinking about clawing back capacity for the PM.
And I love that phrase because it's so evocative, clawing back capacity for the PM. I also remember something very specific about the context that you were in involving false alarms.
Yes.
And I remember that you said clawback capacity in the context of talking about prioritizing false alarms. And it was one of those times when I would have instinctively said, no, of course we should pay attention to false alarms and silence them because they are draining us. But you had such an elegant way of talking about it that I think made it clear to people who don't automatically see it, because it seems like such a low priority thing to be prioritizing. Why should we spend this precious capacity? We only have a tiny drinking straw worth of capacity, and the PM is pressuring us to get more done. Why should we spend any time on this incredibly low value thing of silencing false alarms?
Yeah, yeah, I became obsessed with that for a couple of weeks. It was really fun, because we would get paged, and these alarms would be set up by other teams, and so we would get paged by whatever the thing was, right? The file handles that the system was using, would go above 80%, and we would get paged, or whatever it was, memory usage or internal metrics from some team or the other. And I would look at it and be like, okay, why am I getting an alert? Right? Why is my phone beeping at me? And I would go over and I would talk to the team and I'd be like, hey, so this page, do we need it? Like, it's really irritating. And they'd be like, oh yeah, we definitely need to know when that happens. And I'd be like, okay, do you need to know at 3 a.m.? Because that's what a page is, my friends. A page is a CloudOps person gets woken up at 3 a.m. To look at your system. And they were like, oh, no, it can wait until the morning. And I was like, okay, so we can switch it to a Slack notification in your channel? And they were like, yeah. And the reason that I, went around doing this, basically every time we got paged for a couple of weeks, I would go like, okay, well, either we're going to respond to it, like either we're going to do something to the system to resolve it, or we're going to delete it. And if the team that maintains it doesn't like that, we're going to go and we're going to talk to them about like, why exactly is this thing, what should we be doing here? I'm talking about 3 a.m., but also during the day, right? Whoever was on call would be getting paged like every hour, some days. And like, I don't know about you, but I cannot work if I am getting a notification every hour from a computer telling me that something's very wrong, and then it turns out, oh, whoops, actually, it's just a joke.
Never
It's
mind. You
fine.
don't need to do anything.
I don't mind getting paged if there's something that I need to do, but if you page me at 3 a.m. and then there's nothing to do because the system's fine, I can't finish the stress cycle, right? I can't do the thing. I can't go back to sleep because it's not done because there's nothing to do. And this would happen, during the day too, and people would get paged and it just like wouldn't, so we were just spending all this time on stuff that didn't need human attention. And that was very much the principle, was that like, okay, if we get paged, it needs to be something that requires human intervention. Which in a software context ultimately means it needs to be something that we've never seen before, right? Because a lot of these pages actually were like kind of wreckage from past incidents. You see this a lot in test suites too, right? Like sometimes I'll see this where like there'll be a really flaky test, right? And we're like, oh, we can't delete this test even though it gives us all kinds of false negatives because one time, and it's often like this like long, confusing, weird test, right? And like every time somebody new is dealing with it, they're like, what is happening? This very specific situation. Well, it turns out there was some incident, right? That like, if we'd had that test, we wouldn't have shipped that bug. If we'd had that alert, we wouldn't have shipped this thing. So what we've got actually is an alert that's looking for an old bug that's no longer in the system. And then we're spending cognitive time and like energy thinking about that instead of, well, what's tomorrow's incident going to be?
As you were describing your kind of heuristics for how to claw back, because it's easy to say we're going to claw back time, we're going to increase capacity, but how you actually go about that, with the two strategies that you described. If nothing else happens, 25% of our capacity is 100% uninterrupted, focused on this top priority for the product manager. And any other interruption that comes in, if that interruption ultimately resolves to no action needs to be taken, we're going to get rid of that so that
Yes.
that no longer is sapping our energy. It occurred to me that what you're describing is a tech debt pay down plan kind of thing. It's like, tech debt pay down plan of the snowball approach
The
where
Dave Ramsey
there's
snowball. Yes, yes,
right.
yes, yeah, yeah. No, I very much think about it in terms of like a tech debt snowball. Can I talk about the snowball? Snowball's
Please,
great.
please.
Okay. I love the Dave Ramsey debt snowball because it's such a psychological thing. So this is a strategy for paying off your credit card debt if you have like a lot of credit card debt across a bunch of different cards. The mathematically optimal thing to do in this situation is to find the card that has the highest interest rate and pay that one down first, right? Like you do a budget, you pull out, you figure out some amount of money that you're currently not spending on debt and pay interest rate, and you start paying it, and so you start bringing that down. The mathematically optimal thing is to put whatever amount of money that is onto the card that has the highest interest rate. Dave Ramsey says, no, don't do that. For a lot of people, this doesn't work very well because often that's also the card that has, if not the highest balance, then like a high balance, because like that interest rate has been there, right, pushing the balance up. And so what Dave Ramsey says, no, go by the lowest balance, pay that one off first. Pick the one that's got $500, $1,000, whatever it is. Pay that one off first, and then take the money from that minimum payment and add that to the money that is in your tech debt pay down, or not tech debt. This is just regular debt. This is just debt in your debt pay down bucket, and then roll that over onto whatever the next lowest one is. And you just kind of roll that up, and the payment that you're making is getting larger and larger and larger. As you roll the money that you were paying on the small one. And the reason that I like this so much is that it relies on like getting wins, right? On like having success. Because this is, at least in my experience, the number one reason that teams end up kind of overwhelmed with tech debt or whatever else you want to call it, this like sludge that collects on software engineering teams, is they just kind of stop believing that they can do anything about it. And so they end up getting into this very reactive place where they're just sort of trudging through whatever it is the organization has asked them to do, because at least when the organization has asked them to do something, or if it's not the organization, then like, whatever person has messaged them with like, please, can you help fix this? It's like clear what to do next. And you don't have this like kind of really hard prioritization. I think a lot of times people look at, we're really underwater in the system. We're spending all this time firefighting. Obviously, the architecture that we've got doesn't really support what we want to do. We should do a big rewrite. We should move to microservices. So we should move to event-driven architecture. We should move away from an event-driven architecture. We should rewrite the microservices to be a monolith, right? Often what can work a lot better is, let's start with the smallest problem. What's the smallest problem? Because the smallest problem is one that I can fix, right? And then I get that
Before lunch.
Yeah, right? Then I get that little dopamine hit. And then not only do I get that little dopamine hit of like shipping the thing, doing the thing, but then I've pulled this little sliver out of my hand, right? And I'm not dealing with this irritating little thing all the time, or even occasionally, right? Yeah, so I'm a big fan of like, just what's the easiest problem? Is there one test that we can delete? Right? Is there one thing that we can fix? Is there, and if it's not the smallest possible problem, then like going for a problem that like, I understand how to fix it and it's achievable in a couple of weeks. Our test suite's really slow. It's single threaded. Okay, let's do the work to wrap every test that hits the database in a transaction, so that we can run, as many of them as we've got cores at the same time, and they don't interfere with each other because they're all in their little isolated worlds. And it's like, it's not necessarily easy necessarily. It's not necessarily like it's going to take some work to do, and you maybe have to make a bunch of changes to individual tests, but it's also like, it's something that you can put up on the board and you just kind of grind it out, right? You can make a big checklist of like everything in the code base that we need to touch, and let's just grind it out and just like see that, just burn that punch list down. If you do it this way, if you do something that like it's an easy problem and it saves you a little bit of time every week, then you start getting that time back and you start getting to spend more and more and more and more of your time on either more debt pay down if you really are in that like big, like we're kind of stuck situation, or you can also start spending that on, you can make the PM real happy and ship stuff. And in my experience, actually, PMs are made happy not even by like the absolute amount of stuff that you're shipping, but just by continuous regular shipping. If you're shipping regular incremental value and they can see that that's happening and they can give you feedback on it, just the whole temperature goes down. Every conversation gets easier because suddenly there's not that fear. Everyone in any kind of leadership position in an engineering company, right? VPs of engineering, product managers, head of product, whatever, has had some kind of experience where they heard from the engineers for weeks and weeks and weeks. Oh yeah, we're working on that. Like it's coming, it's happening. And then, 6 months later, it's not happening uh, for a variety of reasons. Often in my experience, because like they build it without plugging it into anything else, and then when they get to the plug it into anything else stage, it doesn't work at all. But that's just like, if you can just really make it clear to the folks that you're working with, especially the people who are not hands on keyboard all the time, right, and who are just kind of like managing things through their computer screen, that there is software coming. It might not be as much software that they want. It might not be as fast as the software, but it's coming. They're going to get some software. It's okay. Just like everybody gets way less stressed, and there's way less pushing.
What I'm hearing you say is the dopamine hit that you described. I think of that in terms of momentum. So totally it's a dopamine but it's also getting that feeling of momentum, and that just sort of starts to carry forward and keeps you going. And you couple that with a certain level of visibility. You talked about having the big checklist that everybody can see, so you not only get the momentum of, I fixed a thing that has been a thorn in my side for the last 6 months before lunch, that feels awesome.
Yeah.
But you also get that ongoing sense of progress because you can look back and see, and out of the 298 things that we had identified 3 months ago, we've already gotten rid of 175. Let's go.
Yeah, momentum. No, momentum is really important because like I think a lot about learned helplessness, right? They did these like just heartbreaking experiments with puppies.
I'm not sure I want to know what this heartbreaking experiment with puppies is.
Yeah, the original learned helplessness experiments are like, basically puppies will stop trying to escape from an uncomfortable situation if they learn that escaping from that uncomfortable situation is impossible. Um, and we have this like deep animal optimization, really, that's like, okay, if it's not possible to change the situation that I am in, I should not waste energy on changing it, right? This is a really rational belief that a lot of people have come to very honestly in their work lives. That like, it's not really worth trying to make things better. And so I shouldn't even try. And even if the individuals, this is the other thing, even if the individuals don't necessarily have this belief, like sometimes a collection of individuals will kind of arrive at this belief in practice. This is something that's really interesting actually about Pivotal, was that like the whole team would rotate, right? The whole team would get replaced, but the team itself would keep certain behaviors. And so there's something in groups of people in situations sometimes that can transcend any individual, but like it's almost like a belief or a mood that a group of people can have. And sometimes it's not possible to fix this. Um, and This is another thing that I think is really important about engineering leadership, but like also just leadership in general, is like being the person who's like thinking about, well, how do we maintain the belief that things can get better on this team and in this group? And one of the ways that you maintain that belief, or you build it in the first place, is just accumulating a lot of evidence. And so you start with little things that can be done quickly, and you have to build up that evidence that things can get better before you are ready sometimes to tackle the like big thing that will take 6 months and needs a lot of planning. And then often as a side effect, right, you can make it easier to do that big thing by doing a bunch of cleanup. Like if sometimes it's the right thing to do to rewrite, if not the whole system, then a significant component of that system. Fixing your test suite, right, before you do that big rewrite and getting to a point where you have a lot of confidence that you've got this test suite that you can run, and like at the very least all the major workflows function, it's going to make it way easier to do that rewrite later. Um,
While simultaneously making your day to day now better.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Because there is this temptation to say the world will be so much better when we get to this amazing new reality. And so we can just ignore all of the old reality. We're gonna
yeah,
get to the new reality. But that doesn't ever work out quite that smoothly.
yeah. It's a form of procrastination. It's I think a lot actually about something that Kent Beck wrote in Tidy First, which is that like basically before you can fix um your if you're working in a code base that's got a big mess in it, and you need to fix that mess, before you fix that mess you kind of have to fix your relationship with yourself in a lot of cases. That like one of the big obstacles in a lot of cases to making things nice in a code base is that people kind of don't believe that they deserve for things to be nice in their code base. Uh, like it can be hard. I deal with this a lot actually when I've been working solo a lot lately. And it's harder when I'm working solo sometimes to take the time to fix those little nitpicks and little splinters. He's like, well, it's just me, right? Like it's just I'm the only person who's bothered by this, so it's I can deal with it. Um, and I think it's really important to create on a team. This is one of the things that I think is like underappreciated about pairing. Um, but that really actually is a downstream of collective code ownership, right? And this sense of like teaminess, that like I'm making this improvement not just for me, but for my team. And ideally, you want to be in a place where it's like, well, I am making this improvement for me, but for many people, that's very, very hard, right? And doing it for my pair, or for my team, can often be a stepping stone for like I'm doing this for myself too. If I have like one piece of advice for people who are in the like lead of leads position, like VP or the senior management position, it's like you need to maintain enough stability of direction so that people can actually finish the swing on things, so that people can actually complete the stuff that they're working on. Um, because one of the things that really will create just like sticky, hard to manage, hard to get out of messes is when the strategic direction of the company is changing faster than the completion cycle for a team. And there's two ways to solve that problem, right? You can also get the team to work in smaller increments, right, and ship more frequently. But if you're setting out like we're going to do this big strategic like huge rewrite thing that's going to take 6 months to a year, and then you do that before the team actually finishes and actually gets the benefit of the thing that they're doing, you're going in another direction. And then you do that again, it's really hard to keep people engaged and keep people doing anything other than just like what's right in front of them, in that situation.
Is that one of the ways in which tech debt is different from financial debt?
It's related to it. So the big way that tech debt is different from financial debt, um, is that financial debt, you always know exactly how much you have.
Okay, that's totally fair.
Right? And especially, I say you, right? Like, as a person who is running a business, right? As somebody in like the CEO hot seat, where you're running a business and you're often understanding things through spreadsheets or through talking to people. You know how much debt you have. You know what the interest rate on that debt is. You know what the consequences will be if you don't make those payments. And people still manage to get themselves into like wishful thinking territory on this stuff all the time. But like it's just much more comprehensible. Whereas with tech debt, engineers are always complaining, right? We're always saying like, oh, that whole thing needs to be rewritten. The people who built that had no idea what they were doing. Was it me 2 years ago? Yes.
Yes.
That's why I know. Um, right? We're always complaining. And we're always trying to rewrite things, and we're always saying like, this isn't as good as it could be. That's like kind of our job, right? Um, but it can make it very difficult, both honestly as like somebody who's not on the team, and as somebody who is on the team, to understand like how much tech debt or whatever it is that we want to call this do we actually have here. How big of a problem is this really? What are the consequences of not taking the time to rewrite this system or update this dependency, or deal with this, like improve our deploy system? The tech debt metaphor makes it kind of feel like, oh, we need to take, like, taking on tech debt is almost like the responsible thing to do. We need to do it to go faster. The same way that you would take on debt in order to grow a business. But it's really, really easy to take on way more tech debt than you intended to. And it's also easy to spend, like, this is again like kind of a consulting perspective thing, but almost never when I'm in a code base is it the worst code base that I've ever seen. That's very, very rare for me, right? Whereas, like, if you're, for folks who have had a more employee-oriented career, they maybe have the same amount of like total years in the engineering industry that I have, but they've seen maybe 2 or 3 big code bases, right? Where I've seen, I don't know, 30 or 40. And obviously there's ways in which like they'll have had deep experience with those systems. But then I'm often coming in and I'm like, this is not that bad, my friends. We got like 80 or 90% test coverage. Like, yeah, it's integration tests and not unit tests. Like, it's not where we want it to be, but like, it could be so much. Like, your tests run like it all. Right? Like, you have no idea how bad it is out there. Uh,
You live in a protected little bubble, friend.
yeah. So there's also like, it goes, I'm saying that like it's easy to take on more tech debt than you think that you're taking on. But then the reverse is also true, where like sometimes, especially if you've been working with a code base for a couple of years, and it's like the main thing that you're familiar with, it can feel really bad and like a huge mess, when actually you're doing fine. And so that makes it really hard to make the kinds of decisions that people expect to be able to make about debt. 'Cause it's just like, it's hard to tell how much you have. So another reason that another thing that's kind of tricky about the tech debt metaphor is that I think that people who run businesses and people who are generally employees of businesses, have really different emotional relationships with the word debt. if I've got an MBA, I've been both like formally trained and am in kind of a social situation where debt's not just normal, it's good, right? Like if I'm in the situation where it's like, okay, yeah, we can take on a lot of debt, or we can get a lot of investment, or we can get a lot of, like, take on a lot of liability here. That's usually because things are going well, right? And we need margin, and we need leverage, so that we can increase the total amount of return that we get, for this like attractive opportunity that we've got. Whereas when I'm thinking about my personal finances, often people have been taught that debt is very, very bad, and that it's almost like a moral failing, right? To have a lot of debt. And so somebody who's coming from that MBA mindset of like, debt is a normal part of running a business. It's a sign that actually things are probably, like, we want to make sure that we're taking on enough debt, right? That's not something that most individuals running households. It's not something that we think, right? And so, a line engineer who is not super businessy hears tech debt and might think, well, we need to keep that number as low as possible. Whereas somebody who is thinking about things in terms of business debt might be like, well, we need to make sure that number's at the right level, right, for the business. And so that's something that's like kind of tricky about the metaphor. Has different emotional valences depending on how you're coming to it.
So bringing all of this together, I feel like what we've talked about is a combination of approaches to a situation where maybe it feels like you're kind of mired in the mud as a team, as an organization. Maybe there's a lot of tension between product managers who want to get more features shipped and an existing engineering team that is basically saying, I mean, they're the puppies that can't escape the uncomfortable situation, right?
Yeah.
And so, what I think I've heard you say throughout this whole conversation is a whole bunch of heuristics that you have that are tiny moves that you can make that are going to create a better reality tomorrow than you have today. And so, maybe can you kind of reflect on, if you were just to try to do rapid fire listing of the heuristics that you think of?
Yeah. The tech debt snowball. So work on the easy thing first before tackling the big, hard, complex thing. Another heuristic is that it kind of doesn't matter what you do first, as long as you can finish it. Um, like, prioritization takes time and takes energy. Random prioritization can sometimes be more effective than like really careful, thought out prioritization, as long as you're in a target rich environment.
That
Um,
is so counterintuitive.
yeah.
Well, I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah,
I
yeah,
totally hear what you're saying. I'm not disagreeing with you, but it is so tempting to say we are mired in the mud. Let's go take a week to go do a deep dive and come out with the big plan.
yeah,
And what you're
yeah.
saying is that's a week that you could have been spending doing random acts of improvement.
Right. Yeah. Random acts of improvement. Though another heuristic that I'll use, that's kind of directly counter to that, actually, is measuring and tracking. Can be really useful. So like, don't just go after the thing that's like right in front of you every time it pops up. Because sometimes that will. So like with test suites, right? If you've got a really flaky test suite, often just fixing whatever test failed that day is not going to give you that sense of momentum that you need. But what you can do is track, like, well, what, and a lot of test running systems just do this automatically now, which is amazing. Um, you can track which tests failed the most frequently, and then fix whatever like the worst failing test that week is. Um, Budgeting time specifically for things is really important. This is an SRE. This is just like straight the SRE book, actually. It's funny, I started with that and I'm ending with that. But the SRE book talks about capping the amount of time that you can spend on toil and like operational work, to make sure that there's time for um, project work, like works that moves the needle and like actively improves the situation. So yeah, just setting a budget for how much time are we going to spend on either half of the set of the team's responsibilities, finding ways to make continuous, visible, like felt progress. So whether that's in the experience that the team is having on the tech debt side or feature delivery, right, on the PMing side, is important.
This has been awesome. And I have so many new ideas about different ways to approach the challenge for a team that finds itself stuck in the mud. And I'm wondering if you have one final last piece of advice for that team that is feeling that sense of learned helplessness.
I think a lot of the challenge there is being able to switch between the long-term view and the very long-term view and the very short-term view. And being able to live in both of those worlds nearly simultaneously. I have this piece that gets shared a lot on my website about the WTF notebook, where like you come onto the team, you first join the team, right, and everything is a mess, and you're like, WTF, what is going on? And a lot of people will start by just immediately, the first thing that they run into being like, what, this is the worst thing I've ever seen, we have to fix this immediately. I think the most important thing for like getting out of that stuck spot, whether you've just wandered into it, right, you just joined a new team that's super stuck, or if you've been dealing with it for a couple of years, like the most important thing in dealing with that is compassion. Like compassion for yourself, compassion for your teammates. It's so powerful to approach these situations with the stance of, man, everybody is doing their best here. Like everybody is trying really hard. That team over there is driving us bonkers by dropping stuff in our lap without enough context for us to actually deal with it, and it's not our job and all this stuff. They are trying their best. I want to understand more about their context, right? Because I'm sure that this makes perfect sense to them, and there's a bunch of stuff that we do that drives them crazy, right? And so much of what gets people really stuck and what gets teams really stuck is just losing that compassion and going into this much more hostile, much more individualistic mode of, well, those people over there are doing this on purpose to be mean to us, or those people over there are stupid, right? Like, this is never going to get better because everybody's, no, like, people really do. They're trying to do the right thing. They're trying to be kind to each other. And you can also, by showing up with that vibe, with that stance, you can often pull it out of other people too. And that's a whole other, like, maintaining that compassion under stress is very hard. I'm not naturally gifted at it. I'm really not. But I continue to put work into, like, showing up every day with compassion for myself, for my teammate, for the company, for the rest of the company, and for a conversation that I have a lot with, especially other consultants that I'm working with, will be like, oh man, this company makes no sense. The people running it are like bonkers. They've taken too much VC money, right? Capitalism is terrible. Nothing can work, and the conversation that I'm often having is that, like, I hear you. Yep. This thing that this person is doing that we have no control over, they're going to keep doing it, right? But there's still these people that we're working with, right, today, on our team, on the neighboring teams, and, like, we can make their experience of being a human being in this world better with the way that we show up to do our work.
What I'm hearing you say is that on the journey to find the small thing that you can change to make tomorrow better than today, if you can do nothing else, you can at least make the experience of being a human in this situation a little bit better.
Yeah.
That's incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
What a great place to end this conversation. Now, I'm so incredibly grateful to you. Thank you so much I was so impressed by everything that you did on Cloud Foundry, just in general, but particularly that stint that you did as the anchor on CloudOps. You, I think, made some incredibly transformative moves for that team and put them in a far better place by the time you rotated off of that team.
Ultimately fix the config system, right? Like that's the kind of the end of that story, right? Is we use the capacity that we cleared out by dealing with it to bring them onto the new config system, and really dramatically reduce, because then the external teams could do all that work, right? Of like figuring out how to config, figuring out how to do the config for PDubs, because it was already in the form that they knew from their own test systems. So
That was
yeah.
amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you. This is great. And yeah, if you want to see more of what I'm working on these days, I believe storytime.team is the landing page for my current project.